They told him a good man would never survive the West. They were wrong. A good boy was the one who wouldn't. He carried his grief like a stone in his pocket, a quiet weight that kept him grounded even when his spirit wanted to drift away. 12 years old, and a lifetime of absence had already settled on his shoulders. The boy, Elias, walked the high plains of Wyoming, the dust of his boots kicking up like memories he couldn't quite touch. The sun beat down, turning the sagebrush a brittle gray. He was hunting, but not for sport. He was hunting for the quiet rhythm of the land to swallow the loud emptiness in his heart. He'd been alone for 6 months, a small ghost in the vastness. The small cabin, nestled in a fold of the hills, was his only companion. The silence there was a living thing, broken only by the wind whistling through the cracks in the walls. His father, a man of few words and strong hands, had taught him to hunt, to track, to mend, and to endure. His mother, a woman with a laugh like a stream and hands that knew how to make things grow, had taught him the names of the wildflowers and the stars. Now, the skills his parents had given him were all he had left. The grief was a constant ache, a phantom limb he was always reaching for. He found him by the riverbed, a dark, motionless shape against the pale sand. A horse stood nearby, grazing on sparse grass, its saddlebags torn and a dark stain on its flank. Elias's first thought was to turn back. He'd been told to avoid strangers, that the world was a jagged place full of broken men, but something in the stillness of the figure drew him forward. As he got closer, he saw the man was breathing. Shallow, ragged gasps. A dark patch bloomed on his side, soaking into the fabric of his shirt. The man's eyes fluttered open, dark and clouded with pain. He saw a boy, small and dusty, standing over him, holding a rifle. There was no fear in the man's gaze, only a weary resignation. Elias knelt, his rifle resting on his thigh. He reached a hand out, hovering over the wound. The man flinched, a low groan escaping his lips. "Don't touch it, boy," the man said, his voice a dry rasp. "It's a bad one." Elias didn't listen. He tore a strip from the hem of his own shirt, a clean, white strip, and pressed it against the wound. The man hissed through clenched teeth. Elias's hands were steady, the same hands his father had taught to tie a knot or set a trap. He worked quickly, his movements economical. The man watched him, a flicker of something in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or a kind of dawning respect. "You got a name, boy?" the man asked, his voice a little stronger. "Elias," he said, not looking up. "Well, Elias, seems you're the first kind soul I've met in a long time. The name's Corbin, Jedediah Corbin." The name meant nothing to Elias. It was just a name, a sound on the wind. He finished the makeshift bandage and looked at the man. His face was a map of hard living, a landscape of scars and sun-creased skin. His eyes, when they met Elias's, held a depth of weariness that went beyond the pain of the wound. "I can get you to my cabin," Elias said, the words surprising even himself. "It's not far." Corbin stared at him. "A cabin? You're alone out here?" Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on a distant point on the horizon. "My parents, they're gone." Corbin's face was unreadable. He looked at the boy, small and alone in the big world. Then, a slow nod. "All right, son, help me up." It was a slow, agonizing journey back to the cabin. Elias led Corbin's horse, and the man leaned heavily on the boy's shoulder, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The landscape seemed to stretch forever, the hills a series of endless waves. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. Elias felt the man's weight, the solid reality of his pain, and it was a strange comfort. It was something to do, a purpose to fill the empty hours. At the cabin, Elias helped the man inside, laying him on a pallet by the hearth. He built a small fire, the flames licking at the dry wood, casting a warm, dancing light on the man's face. He brought him water, a tin cup full, and Corbin drank it down, his eyes closed in what looked like relief. "You got a medicine box?" Corbin asked, his voice a low rumble. Elias rummaged in a small wooden chest, the one his mother had kept her sewing things in. He pulled out a tin box, his father's old tin, and inside were the salves and tinctures they used for everything from a cut finger to a fever. He found a clean cloth and a bottle of whiskey. Corbin watched him, a faint smile on his lips. Smart boy. A man needs two things when he's been shot: whiskey to clean the wound, and whiskey to dull the mind. Elias poured a little of the dark liquid on the man's side. Corbin stiffened, his jaw clenched, a low hiss of pain escaping. Elias worked without a word, his movements precise, his hands steady. He cleaned the wound, applied a thick, honey-colored salve, and rebandaged it with fresh cloth. He was his father's son, practical and quiet in the face of suffering. The next few days were a strange, silent dance. Elias would go about his chores, chopping wood, hunting for rabbits, mending the fence, and Corbin would lie on the pallet, a dark presence in the small space. They rarely spoke. The cabin, once filled with a suffocating silence, now held a different kind of quiet, a companionable silence. Corbin watched Elias from his pallet, his dark eyes following the boy's every move. He saw the way Elias tended to the small vegetable patch, a patch that had once been his mother's pride. He saw the way Elias would sit by the fire at night, the grief a silent shadow on his face. One evening after the sun had gone down and the fire had been stoked, Corbin broke the silence. "Your folks, what happened?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. Elias froze, his hand still on a piece of kindling. He looked at Corbin, his eyes holding a familiar emptiness. "They were taken," he said, the word a whisper. "A man came. He wanted the horses. My father, he wouldn't let him." Corbin's face was unreadable in the flickering firelight. He shifted on the pallet, a grunt of pain escaping him. "And your mother?" She tried to stop him," Elias said, his voice barely audible. He looked away, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. He took the horses and left them for me to find." Corbin was silent for a long moment, the only sound the crackle of the fire. The man's face was a mask, his eyes dark pools. He reached a hand out, a slow, deliberate movement, and placed it on Elias's shoulder. The touch was firm, not a gesture of comfort, but of shared weight. "Some men are like a plague," Corbin said, his voice a low growl. "They poison everything they touch." Elias nodded, a single sharp movement. The silence returned, but this time it was different. It was heavy, laden with unspoken things. Days turned into a week, then two. Corbin's wound was healing, a jagged scar forming on his side. He began to move around, his strength returning slowly. He would sit on the porch, a silent sentinel, watching the plains. One day, as Elias was oiling his rifle, Corbin spoke. "That rifle, your father's?" Elias nodded, running a rag along the cold steel. "He taught me how to use it, said a man has to be able to protect his own." Corbin looked at the rifle, then at Elias's face, which held a look of profound, quiet sorrow. "He was a good man, your father," Corbin said. It was a statement, not a question. Elias looked up, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "How do you know?" Corbin was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on a distant point. "I know the kind of man who'd fight for what's his, a man who'd stand his ground." He paused. Then his voice dropped to a low, almost inaudible murmur. "He was a good man, the kind of man who deserves to be remembered." Elias didn't know what to say. He went back to cleaning the rifle, his movements a little quicker now. He felt a shift in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. He felt watched, but not with simple curiosity. Corbin's gaze was a physical thing, a weight on his skin. The next day, Corbin was well enough to ride. Elias stood on the porch, watching him saddle his horse. The sun was a low, fiery disk in the sky. "I owe you, boy," Corbin said, his voice gruff. He was a man who was not used to being in debt. Elias shook his head. "I didn't do it for that." Corbin looked at him, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "No, you didn't. That's what makes it worth more." He paused, then reached into his saddlebags. He pulled out a worn leather pouch and tossed it to Elias. The boy caught it, the weight of it surprising. He opened it and saw a handful of silver and gold coins glinting in the late afternoon sun. "That's more than enough," Elias said, his voice a little hoarse. "Take it," Corbin said, his voice a low command. You'll need it. The world's not a soft place for a boy alone." He was silent for a moment, then added, "It was a mistake, you know. I didn't mean for them to die." The words hung in the air, heavy and solid. Elias looked at him, his mind reeling. The words, the man, the memory of the night his parents had been taken. He remembered the man's face, a face he had only seen for a moment in the dark, but a face that had haunted his nightmares for 6 months. He looked at Corbin's face, a map of scars and sun-creased skin. He looked at the hard, unyielding line of his jaw. And he saw it. The same man. The man who had taken everything from him. The blood went cold in his veins. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. He felt a wave of nausea, a dizzying rush of disbelief and horror. The man who had been lying on his floor, the man he had tended to, had saved, was the man who had left him with nothing. "You," Elias whispered, the word a curse, a prayer, a statement of impossible truth. Corbin was silent, his face a grim, stony mask. He didn't deny it. The truth was in his eyes, in the deep, unreadable weariness that Elias had mistaken for something else. "They were standing between me and what I wanted," Corbin said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They shouldn't have done that. You get old enough, you learn that some people get in the way of others." Elias stared at him, the pouch of coins slipping from his numb fingers and falling to the dust with a soft thud. He looked at the man he had thought was a friend, a quiet ally in his grief. He looked at the face that had haunted him, now bathed in the gentle light of the setting sun. All the quiet moments, the shared silences, the gruff words of advice, they were a lie. A beautiful, terrible lie. His hands, the hands that had been so steady tending to the man's wound, began to tremble. His heart, which had been a quiet stone, began to pound a frantic, furious rhythm against his ribs. He felt the grief give way to a searing, white-hot rage. It burned through him, consuming the quiet boy he had become. He looked at his father's rifle, resting against the porch railing. He knew how to use it. He knew how to aim, how to squeeze the trigger, how to end a life. It would be easy, a quick, clean shot. Justice. Corbin was watching him, his eyes steady, unblinking. He didn't reach for his gun. He didn't move. It was as if he was waiting for Elias to make his decision. A strange, twisted test. Elias's hand reached for the rifle. He gripped the smooth, worn wood of the stock. He felt the cold steel of the barrel. He lifted it, the weight of it familiar in his hands. He aimed it, the iron sights lining up on Corbin's chest, on the spot where his heart was beating. He could feel the pulse in his own throat, a wild thrumming. The man stood still, his face impassive. A gust of wind stirred the dust around their feet, carrying with it the scent of sage and the promise of a cold night. The world was silent, waiting. And then Elias saw something else. He saw the empty cabin, the empty fields, the empty ache in his own soul. He saw his parents' faces, not in the memory of their death, but in the memory of their life. His father's steady eyes, his mother's gentle smile. He remembered their lessons, not just the lessons of survival, but the lessons of what it meant to be a man, a good man. He saw the cycle of violence, a dark river that would swallow him whole if he stepped into it. He saw the hollow victory of revenge. He saw the empty space that would be left behind. His hand trembled. He lowered the rifle, the barrel dipping toward the ground. He looked at Corbin, his face a strange mixture of sorrow and a grim kind of understanding. "You're not worth it," Elias said, the words a raw, guttural sound. "You're not worth me becoming something I'm not." Corbin's face was unreadable. He looked at the boy, then at the rifle, then back at the boy. A slow, almost imperceptible nod. He turned and swung his leg over the saddle. He didn't look back. Elias watched him ride away, a dark silhouette against the fading light of the sky. The man's horse moved with a slow, steady rhythm, carrying him farther and farther away. The silence returned to the plains, but it was a different kind of silence now. It wasn't empty. It was full of a quiet, hard-earned knowledge. He bent down and picked up the leather pouch from the dust. He held it in his hand, the weight of the coins a strange, heavy burden. He looked at the cabin, the place that had been his refuge and his prison. He was still alone, but he was not the same. He had been tested, and he had not broken. He had chosen to live, to carry his grief, not as a weapon, but as a part of who he was. He walked back into the cabin, the fire a warm beacon in the coming darkness. He was just a boy, small and alone in a vast, unforgiving world, but he had chosen a different path. And in the heart of that choice, there was a quiet, enduring kind of hope. The stone in his pocket was still there, but it felt a little lighter now. And as the night settled over the land, Elias sat by the fire, a small, solitary figure, and began to build a new life, brick by quiet brick. If you enjoyed this incredible tale from the frontier, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories from the American West. Click on the video on the screen for another tale we think you will love.